San Antonio, 1930s. The country's broke, the Depression is in full swing, yet the streets are alive with music, color, and the smell of food that could feed a crowd on pennies. Tamales steaming in husks, bowls of Fideo soup, sizzling picadillo over rice, even sweet tamales dusted with cinnamon sugar. Fiesta wasn't just a party, it was survival dressed up as celebration. And here's the thing, the 25 Mexican foods served back then weren't only about taste, they were about resilience, pride, and keeping a culture alive in the toughest of times. Stick with me, because by the end, you'll see how these dishes didn't just feed bellies. They told the story of a city that refused to give up. 1. Fideo soup with chicken and vegetables. Imagine a chilly spring night in 1930s San Antonio. The parade drums are fading, the lanterns are glowing, and families are gathered around steaming bowls of Fideo soup. Thin vermicelli noodles, toasted until golden, then simmered in a tomato broth with bits of chicken and garden vegetables. It wasn't fancy, but it was pure comfort. For Mexican families hit hardest by the Depression, Fideo was survival. A handful of pasta, a few vegetables, maybe a scrap of chicken. That was enough to stretch into a meal for 6. Vendors ladled it from giant pots, serving it with tortillas hot off the comal, and the smell alone could stop you in your tracks. Here's the twist. In 1935, a bowl of Fideo might cost you just 5 cents. Today, making it at home costs under $7 and still feeds a family. Cheap then, cheap now, and proof that some comfort foods never go out of style. 2. Calabacita. At Fiesta San Antonio in the 1930s, not every plate came stacked with meat. Many families leaned on the land, and one of the simplest yet most beloved dishes was calabacita. Tender squash, onions, and fresh corn kernels sautéed together until sweet and savory. It was a dish straight from backyard gardens. Picture the scene. A vendor stirring a big iron skillet, the smell of onions sizzling, corn popping, and tortillas warming right beside it. Add a scoop of beans on the side, and you had a meal that could keep you full all day for just a few cents. It wasn't luxury, it was ingenuity. Here's the kicker. During the Depression, meat was expensive, but vegetables grew freely in San Antonio yards and community plots. That made calabacita more than a side dish. It was survival disguised as comfort. And today, for under $6, you can make a pot big enough to feed a family, still true to its roots. 3. Picadillo. If there was one dish that stretched a dollar further than most in 1930s San Antonio, it was picadillo. Imagine ground beef sizzling in a cast-iron pan, mixed with diced potatoes, onions, and tomatoes, then spooned over a heap of rice. Simple, hearty, and filling. For families scraping by during the Depression, picadillo was genius. A single pound of beef could feed a crowd once you bulked it up with potatoes and rice. Vendors at Fiesta served it hot from big pans, the rich aroma pulling people in from the street. It wasn't just food, it was a reminder that even tough times could taste good. Here's the twist. Many kids back then thought they were eating a feast, not realizing it was a survival hack. And in 2025, you can still cook a whole pot for under $10. Picadillo shows us that thrift and flavor can dance together, and sometimes the cheapest meals are the most loved. 4. Migas. Now picture this, day-old tortillas piling up in kitchens all across San Antonio. Nothing went to waste in the 1930s, so families turned scraps into something magical, migas. Strips of leftover tortillas fried until crispy, then scrambled with eggs, onions, and a touch of chili. Served alongside beans, it was humble, but it tasted like a celebration. At Fiesta, migas became a breakfast favorite. Vendors cracked eggs onto sizzling skillets, tossing in tortilla strips with practiced speed. The aroma was irresistible, crispy corn mingling with the richness of eggs. Crowds lined up, not just for flavor, but because it was cheap, hot, and filling. Here's the hook. What started as a thrifty, waste-not dish is now a brunch classic across Texas. Back then, a plate might cost a nickel. Today, You can feed a family breakfast for under $5, proof that the simplest survival foods can outlast the hardest times. 5. Enchiladas with red sauce and cheese, served with rice and refried beans. Nothing says Fiesta quite like a plate of enchiladas, corn tortillas dipped in a smoky red chili sauce, stuffed or rolled, then topped with melted cheese. On the side, a scoop of rice and creamy refried beans. In the 1930s, this was one of the star attractions at food stalls, a dish that fed the eyes as much as the stomach. Picture long wooden tables, families crowded together, the air filled with mariachi music and the scent of chilies roasting. For just a dime, you'd get a plate that felt rich, even when times weren't. Enchiladas were more than food, they were pride on a plate, a taste of home in public celebration. Here's the kicker. That smoky chili sauce wasn't just for flavor. It was a way to stretch simple tortillas into something unforgettable. And in 2025, you can still whip up a pan of enchiladas for under $12, feeding the whole family while carrying forward a flavor that's been loved for generations. 6. Tamales. If there was one sound that defined Fiesta nights in the 1930s, it was the hiss of steam rising from tamale pots. Tamales were everywhere, masa dough spread on corn husks, filled with a bit of pork or beef, then folded and steamed until tender. Served with salsa and a spoonful of crema, they were the ultimate festival food, portable, filling, and cheap. Picture a vendor lifting the lid of a pot, a cloud of steam escaping, revealing dozens of tamales stacked tight. People lined up with nickels in hand, eager for something warm they could carry as they wandered the crowded streets. For families, tamales weren't just food, they were tradition, often made in big batches that brought everyone together in the kitchen. Here's the twist. In the Depression, meat was scarce, so tamales often had more masa than filling. Yet nobody complained, because the flavor was pure comfort. Even today, a dozen homemade tamales can be made for under $15, carrying the same magic that once fed Fiesta crowds nearly a century ago. 7. Carne guisada. By the 1930s, San Antonio kitchens had mastered the art of slow-cooking tough cuts of meat into something unforgettable. Carne guisada, a rich beef stew simmered with onions, peppers, and spices, was one of those dishes that could transform the cheapest ingredients into a feast. Served with rice and warm tortillas, it was hearty enough to fuel a whole day of celebration. At Fiesta, you'd spot families crowded around steaming bowls, tearing tortillas to scoop up the thick, savory gravy. The trick was patience. Meat simmered for hours until tender, turning scraps into something melt in your mouth. For Depression-era families, this wasn't just flavor. It was survival, stretching a few pieces of beef into a pot that could feed everyone. Here's the kicker. In 1933, a plate of carne guisada cost less than 15 cents. Today, you can still make a big pot for under $20, enough to serve a family and maybe even neighbors, just like it was shared at Fiesta. Some flavors, it turns out, are timeless. 8. Huevos rancheros with beans and warm corn tortillas. When the sun rose over San Antonio during Fiesta week, few breakfasts were more beloved than huevos rancheros. 2 fried eggs laid gently on a warm corn tortilla, then smothered in a spicy tomato chili sauce, served with a side of beans and more tortillas to scoop it all up. It was rustic ranch food brought into the heart of the city. In the 1930s, eggs were a treasure. Families who kept chickens had a steady source of protein when money was tight. At Fiesta, vendors cracked eggs onto hot griddles, the yolks sizzling as the sauce bubbled beside them. Hungry crowds lined up, knowing this simple breakfast could power them through parades, music, and dancing until late into the night. Here's the twist. Huevos rancheros wasn't just a meal, it was a statement. Bold, filling, proudly Mexican. Back then, a plate cost less than a dime. Today, you can still make it for under $6, proof that some traditions never lose their fire. 9. Chile con carne, served with warm tortillas or cornbread. Few dishes carried as much pride in San Antonio's 1930s Fiesta as chile con carne. A pot of rich chili simmered low and slow with beef, chilies, tomatoes, and spices. It was bold, fiery, and unforgettable. Served with warm tortillas or a hunk of cornbread, it was the kind of meal that filled both stomach and spirit. During the Depression, chile con carne was genius. A little meat went a long way once you bulked it up with beans or vegetables. Fiesta vendors stirred giant cauldrons of it, the smoky aroma drifting down the crowded streets, pulling people toward the stalls. One bite, and you knew why San Antonio claimed Chile as its own. Here's the kicker. This wasn't just food, it was identity. Chile told the story of Mexican heritage in Texas, spicy, resilient, and impossible to ignore. In 1932, a bowl might cost a nickel. Today, you can still make a whole pot for under $15, feeding a family just like it did nearly a century ago. 10. Tacos. By the 1930s, tacos had already made their way from home kitchens to Fiesta food stalls, and they were an instant hit. Picture it. Warm corn tortillas, sometimes fried until crisp, sometimes soft and pliable, stuffed with spiced meat and topped with a spoonful of salsa. Simple, portable, irresistible. For Depression-era families, tacos were a smart way to stretch small amounts of meat. A few scraps of beef or pork, bulked up with onions or potatoes, suddenly became a meal for the whole family. At Fiesta, vendors worked fast, frying tortillas on hot griddles, folding them over sizzling fillings, and handing them out by the dozen. Here's the twist. Back then, tacos weren't the oversized creations we see today. They were small, quick bites, cheap enough that even a few pennies could buy you one. In 2025, tacos are a global superstar, but their roots go back to nights like these in San Antonio, where they were born as food of the people. 11. Sopa de tortilla. When nights grew cool during Fiesta, nothing warmed the soul quite like a steaming bowl of sopa de tortilla. Imagine a rich tomato broth simmered with garlic, onions, and chilies, then topped with strips of fried tortilla, bits of chicken, and fresh cilantro. Vendors ladled it into bowls, the steam rising as mariachi trumpets played in the distance. For Depression-era families, this dish was both practical and comforting. Leftover tortillas were never wasted. They became the crunchy heart of the soup. Add a little chicken, stretch it with broth and vegetables, and suddenly a family of 6 could eat well for just a few cents. Here's the twist. Tortilla soup wasn't just about feeding stomachs. It fed community. People stood shoulder to shoulder, sipping from bowls, finding warmth in both the food and the moment. Even now, you can make a pot for under $12, carrying forward the same flavors that once wrapped Fiesta nights in comfort. 12. Barbacoa de res. At Fiesta, in the 1930s, Sundays meant barbacoa de res, the slow-cooked beef head that turned scraps into a delicacy. The meat was wrapped, roasted for hours in underground pits or large kettles, until tender enough to fall apart at the touch. Served with its rich consommé, fresh onions, and warm tortillas, it was both rustic and deeply satisfying. In hard times, nothing went to waste. Using the whole head, cheeks, tongue, even eyes, meant feeding more mouths with fewer resources. Fiesta stalls would sell barbacoa by the pound, and families crowded around tables, tearing tortillas, dipping into consommé, savoring every bite. Here's the kicker. What some once saw as poor man's food became one of the most iconic dishes of Mexican cuisine. In the 1930s, a barbacoa taco cost just pennies. Today, it's a Sunday ritual across Texas, proof that resilience can turn necessity into tradition and tradition into pride. 13. Frijoles charros. In the bustling plazas of Fiesta San Antonio, giant pots of frijoles charros bubbled over open flames. Pinto beans, simmered slow with bits of bacon, sausage, or chorizo, spiced with chilies, onions, and tomatoes. Served with warm tortillas, it was cowboy food turned into festival comfort. During the Depression, beans were the backbone of survival. Cheap, filling, and endlessly versatile, they became the canvas for whatever scraps of meat or vegetables a family could spare. At Fiesta, vendors turned this humble staple into something festive, thick, smoky, and hearty enough to share with friends and strangers alike. Here's the twist. Frijoles charros weren't just a side dish. For many, they were the meal, protein, spice, and comfort in a single bowl. In 1930s San Antonio, a serving cost mere pennies. Today, you can make a whole pot for under $10, and the taste is still the same, rich, earthy, and deeply tied to community. 14. Pollo asado. When fiesta nights stretched long, the smell of pollo asado drifted through the plazas, chicken marinated in garlic, lime, and spices, then grilled or baked until the skin was golden and crisp. Served with rice and a side of vegetables, it was simple, wholesome, and irresistibly fragrant. In the 1930s, chicken wasn't the cheap staple we know today. It was a treat, often reserved for Sundays or special gatherings. That made pollo asado at Fiesta feel like a luxury, a taste of celebration even in hard times. Vendors turned whole birds slowly over coals, basting them until the meat was juicy and smoky. Crowds gathered, tortillas in hand, ready to tear off pieces and share. Here's the kicker. What was once a once-in-a-while indulgence became a Fiesta classic. Back then, a plate cost around 15 cents. Today, you can still roast a whole chicken with sides for under $12, proof that some festival flavors never left the family table. 15. Tamales dulces. Not every tamal at Fiesta San Antonio was savory. For kids in the 1930s, the real treasure was tamales dulces, masa sweetened with sugar, cinnamon, sometimes raisins or bits of fruit, all steamed in bright pink-tinted corn husks. Vendors stacked them high, their sweet aroma drifting through the night air like a promise. In the middle of the Depression, these tamales were pure joy. They weren't heavy with meat or spice. They were dessert disguised as tradition. Families would share a bundle after the parades, kids unwrapping the husks eagerly, their fingers sticky with sugar. A single bite brought comfort and celebration, even when money was scarce. Here's the twist. While savory tamales kept bellies full, tamales dulces fed the spirit. They reminded people that sweetness still had a place in hard times. Back then, a sweet tamal cost just a penny. Today, you can still make a dozen for under $10, and they remain one of Fiesta's most nostalgic delights. 16. Buñuelos fritos. As the parades wound down and lanterns lit up the night sky, nothing capped off a Fiesta evening better than buñuelos fritos. Imagine thin rounds of dough dropped into hot oil, puffing up golden and crisp, then sprinkled with cinnamon sugar and drizzled with honey. Sweet, crunchy, and warm, the perfect festival bite. In the 1930s, buñuelos were more than dessert. They were a symbol of celebration. Flour, sugar, and oil were basic, affordable ingredients, yet when transformed, they became pure joy. Vendors stacked them high on platters, their sweetness cutting through the smoky air of chili and grilled meats. Children tugged at their parents' hands, eager for that first sugary crunch. Here's the twist. During the Depression, sweets were rare luxuries. A buñuelo wasn't just food, it was a small miracle, proof that even in lean times, life could be sweet. Back then, a piece cost a penny. Today, you can fry up a dozen for under $6, carrying on a tradition that still makes Fiesta sparkle. 17. Menudo. If there was one dish that truly captured the spirit of Fiesta mornings, it was menudo. A hearty soup made from beef tripe, simmered for hours with chilies, garlic, and hominy, then served with lime, onions, and warm tortillas on the side. Strong, spicy, and restorative, menudo was more than a meal. It was medicine. In the 1930s, nothing went to waste. Tripe, often discarded by butchers, became the star of a dish that could feed whole families on just a few cents. Fiesta vendors ladled it out by the bowlful, the steam carrying a bold aroma that drew crowds after long nights of dancing and music. For many, it was the ultimate cure for both hunger and exhaustion. Here's the kicker. Menudo turned scraps into celebration, proof that resilience could taste rich and comforting. Back then, a bowl cost under a dime. Today, you can make a pot for under $20, and it still carries the same reputation as Fiesta's most legendary hangover cure. 18. Gorditas rellenas. Among the sizzling sounds of Fiesta food stalls, few things drew crowds faster than gorditas rellenas. Thick corn tortillas, split open like little pockets, then stuffed with savory fillings, spiced meat, beans, or cheese, topped with a spoonful of fresh salsa. Portable, hearty, and bursting with flavor, they were a festival favorite. In the 1930s, gorditas were a clever way to stretch ingredients. A handful of masa, pressed and cooked on a comal, became a shell for whatever a family had on hand. At Fiesta, vendors turned that practicality into celebration, handing out gorditas hot off the griddle, their edges crisp and smoky. Here's the twist. While tacos were quick bites, gorditas felt like a full meal in your hand. They were comfort you could carry as you wandered the streets, mariachi music in the background. Back then, a gordita cost just a few pennies. Today, you can still make a dozen for under $10, proof that some festival foods never lose their magic. 19. Chiles rellenos. At Fiesta San Antonio in the 1930s, few dishes looked as dramatic or tasted as comforting as chiles rellenos. Plump green peppers, roasted until tender, stuffed with creamy cheese, then dipped in egg batter and fried before being smothered in a rich tomato sauce. It was a dish that combined bold flavor with pure celebration. For Depression-era families, chiles rellenos were both practical and indulgent. Peppers grew easily in backyard gardens, and cheese or a bit of meat could stretch to fill an entire meal. At Fiesta, vendors stacked platters high with sizzling chilies, the sauce bubbling as they served them alongside rice or beans. Here's the kicker. While it looked like a feast, the cost was surprisingly low. A single chile, stuffed and sauced, might run you just a nickel. Today, you can still make a tray for under $12, and the first bite carries the same balance of smoky, cheesy, and tangy flavor that kept Fiesta crowds coming back for more. 20. Carne a la tampiqueña. By the late 1930s, Fiesta crowds were introduced to something new, carne a la tampiqueña. Created in 1939, it was a true feast on a plate. A thin grilled steak, a cheese enchilada covered in chili sauce, guacamole, beans, and sometimes rice. It wasn't just a meal, it was a statement of abundance during years when most families had little. At Fiesta, this dish stood out. Vendors plated it with pride, the sizzling steak laid across enchiladas swimming in sauce, bright guacamole on the side. It was colorful, filling, and felt almost luxurious compared to humbler fare like beans and tortillas. Families might save up just for a chance to enjoy it once. Here's the kicker. Carne a la tampiqueña was born during tough times but became a Mexican classic nationwide. In 1939, it was worth every dime. Today, making it at home costs under $20. A splurge, maybe, but still cheaper than dining out. A reminder that even in hardship, people dreamed of a full plate. 21. Handmade tortillas with refried beans and fresh cheese. Sometimes the simplest meals drew the longest lines. At Fiesta San Antonio in the 1930s, vendors pressed tortillas hechas a mano, handmade corn tortillas, hot off the comal. They'd smear on refried beans, sprinkle fresh white cheese, and hand it over still steaming. No meat, no frills, just pure comfort in your hand. For Depression-era families, this was everyday survival food. Beans were cheap, tortillas stretched corn into filling meals, and fresh cheese gave just enough richness to make it feel special. At Fiesta, though, even this humble bite became festive. Imagine kids running through the plaza, nibbling on bean and cheese tortillas while the music played, their parents grabbing a stack for only a few cents. Here's the twist. While it might seem plain compared to steak or enchiladas, this dish was the heart of Fiesta, affordable, nourishing, and loved by all. Today, you can still make a dozen tortillas with beans and cheese for under $6, proof that simplicity never goes out of style. 22. Caldo de pollo con verduras. On cooler Fiesta evenings in the 1930s, families gathered around steaming bowls of caldo de pollo con verduras, clear chicken broth simmered with carrots, squash, corn, potatoes, and a few pieces of chicken. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfort in its purest form. Served with warm tortillas, it filled both stomach and spirit. During the Depression, this soup was a lifesaver. A single chicken could stretch into meals for days when paired with garden vegetables and plenty of broth. Fiesta vendors served it from big pots, ladling it into bowls for just a nickel or two. The steam carried the smell of garlic and cilantro through the night air, drawing people in for warmth and nourishment. Here's the kicker. Caldo de pollo wasn't just food, it was medicine. Mothers swore it could heal exhaustion, sadness, even sickness. And in 2025, you can still make a hearty pot for under $12, a timeless reminder that the simplest recipes often carry the deepest comfort. 23. Arroz con pollo. At Fiesta San Antonio in the 1930s, the scent of arroz con pollo drifted through the plazas, chicken browned and simmered with rice, tomatoes, peppers, and spices until everything blended into one golden, savory pot. Vendors served it in heaping spoonfuls, steaming and colorful, a dish that looked festive even in the hardest times. For Depression-era families, arroz con pollo was genius. A single chicken, stretched with plenty of rice and vegetables, could feed 10 hungry mouths. At Fiesta, it was both practical and celebratory, families sharing bowls under paper lanterns, the flavors carrying warmth long after the music stopped. Here's the kicker. Arroz con pollo wasn't just filling, it was symbolic. Rice represented abundance, chicken brought richness, and tomatoes added brightness to otherwise lean meals. Back then, a plate might cost less than a dime. Today, you can still make a pot for under $15, proving that some dishes never lose their power to bring people together. 24. Empanadas rellenas de carne. As the music played and crowds filled the streets, the smell of empanadas rellenas de carne wafted from Fiesta stalls. Golden pastry pockets, stuffed with spiced ground beef and onions, baked or fried until crisp, then served with a spoonful of salsa roja. Portable, hearty, and delicious, empanadas were the perfect food for festival-goers on the move. For families in the 1930s, empanadas were both thrifty and celebratory. A small amount of meat, bulked up with potatoes or beans, could stretch into dozens of turnovers. At Fiesta, vendors piled them high, the pastry flaky, the filling steaming hot as people bit into them between songs and parades. Here's the twist. Empanadas weren't just a treat, they were a symbol of ingenuity, turning scraps into something that felt indulgent. Back then, a single empanada cost just a few pennies. Today, you can still bake a dozen for under $12, and the first bite carries the same joy that once lit up Fiesta nights nearly a century ago. 25. Tostadas de ceviche. Not every Fiesta dish in the 1930s was heavy or hearty. Some were bright and refreshing, like tostadas de ceviche. Imagine fresh fish or shrimp cured in lime juice, mixed with onions, chilies, and cilantro, then piled high on a crispy fried tortilla. Topped with pickled onions and an extra squeeze of lime, it was a cool contrast to the rich stews and tamales. Seafood was a luxury during the Depression, but San Antonio's connection to the Gulf made it possible. Vendors offered small ceviche tostadas as a special treat, light enough to eat while wandering through parades or listening to mariachis. For many, it was their first taste of coastal Mexican flavors brought inland. Here's the kicker. In 1930, a tostada like this might have cost closer to a dime, making it a rare splurge. Today, you can still prepare a dozen at home for under $15, proof that even in lean times, Fiesta found room for something fresh, zesty, and celebratory. Fiesta San Antonio in the 1930s showed us something powerful. Food wasn't just survival, it was celebration. Tamales, gorditas, menudo, buñuelos. Each dish carried pride and resilience when times were toughest. And here's the thing. These same flavors still live on today, nearly 100 years later. If this trip back in time made you hungry for more, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which Fiesta dish you'd grab first. And don't go anywhere, because in the next video, we're diving into another food story that will surprise you even more. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.